Welcome to Changing the Perception of Blindness, one conversation at a time, where we aim to break down barriers, demystify blindness, and promote real and lasting change. Join host David Steinmetz as he connects us with professionals who are making a positive impact in the community. These leaders help empower individuals who are blind or have other disabilities to live a full and inclusive life. Let's lean in as David kicks off today's conversation.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Changing the Perception of Blindness, one conversation at a time. I want to first and foremost thank Arizona Industries for the Blind, AIB, for sponsoring this show and continue to support. AIB empowers people who are blind to achieve their highest goals and aspirations through creating and sustaining employment, as well as encouraging me always to challenge myself and become a podcaster. So here we are. So thank you, AIB, and my special guest today, Chris LaFollette, President CEO of AIB. When we talk about changing the perception of blindness through conversation, I think that is one of the many ways that we break down the barriers that once anything that people have maybe fear or unknown about. The best way to handle that is to have a conversation about it. And we've been talking here off air about a lot of different topics and share ideas. We don't all have to understand it. We don't all have to agree on things, but we have to gain some knowledge, and that knowledge helps change perspectives and normalize things in conversation. And blindness is one of those things. I think that most people fear blindness. They fear it more than cancer, or they fear it more than death even, because they just can't imagine living life the way someone who is blind, vision impaired is. And those come from family, maybe values or ideas and thoughts. It could come from religion. It could come from just society, because people were kind of put into homes or out of the community so that people didn't have to deal with it. And we are no longer in that position, and people who are blind or have other disabilities do expect to have full inclusion in the community. And so my show is really, how do we have these conversations, reach out to business owners and hiring managers so that they can gain insight that people who are blind or people with disabilities have talents, have skills. They are able to achieve the same things that people without disabilities are able to do. We just do it a little bit differently and use technology, but we ultimately get to the same spot. And that's what really we hope to accomplish with this show. And we bring in thought leaders and people that are making a difference, like Chris. Chris has been in the disability community for a long time. Although he's a young man, he's been around for about 35 years in this industry in one form or another. And so I'd love to bring him in and have some of his insights from a leadership role, as well as a person who has been around people with disabilities, pretty much for the last, 25, 26 years, and has a great insight and love to share. So Chris, let's get this show going. If you want to just kind of give yourself a little bit of kudos and your background.
So look, David, it's thank you first and foremost. I appreciate the platform, as I always do. But hey, look, so I've got a daughter disabled, and she will be 34 years old this year. And I was an athlete, and I'd never really been around someone who had disabilities. You see in public, and you might see occasionally someone out maybe in a different form, but at that time, and again, I'm talking about the late 80s, it wasn't very prevalent in school systems. So it's not something I was used to, as well as when I went to college, I didn't see that. So when I had my daughter, I got a new perspective, just like everything else. We talked about having a discussion. Well, I got reality. And and I was at a place called Johns Hopkins, and where there was disabilities everywhere. And it's a world leader of hospitals and medicine. But at that time, David, still it still was different. And the one thing that I was very fortunate is it happened to me. And I know that sounds strange, but it happened to
Mm-hmm.
me. I just didn't have to look at it. I didn't have to work with it. It was mine. And for that point, I loved it. It was very easy to love my daughter. She was my daughter, but I had to learn quickly. She had vision issues. She had vocabulary issues. Of course, she had gait issues from the beginning. She has cerebral palsy and several things that go along with her. But David, the thing that makes her different is her, not her disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that I had to learn. So you talked about knowledge in kind of your beginning, your intro, and it is. And we get acclimated to our environment. And I'm very fortunate that at a very early age, I was 21 when I had her. And the fact that it thrusted me into a field that I knew nothing about, that is part of my life today. And it drives it is a passion.
Mm-hmm.
It drives me. And matter of fact, I tell you what it even does, it inspires me because I'm able to see things through others that maybe I would have never seen before. And I think it's been a godsend for me. It has created, again, a platform, but more so than anything else, it's given me knowledge to say that, hey, let's look at individuals as individuals, not because of disabilities.
Well, very impactful and so true, Chris, that one, right, we often have to react to a situation that we're unfamiliar with, right? In case the birth of your daughter and cerebral palsy, being thrusted into that world, you have to learn quickly. And as time goes on, you start learning about more and more, and you see opportunities and things like that. And for some people, that growth spurs them and leads them into other directions. And I think that happens a lot with organizations that um, you hear about that are very social minded, is because they had a child with a disability, and they say, what does the future look like for my kid? What is it that I can do to benefit my son or daughter, or that community, and that drives them and brings, as you mentioned, your passion.
Well, yeah, we'll get some detailed about that, but it has to be something that changes in the individual. But in an organization like that, you're exactly right. It's usually a family member or someone they're close with that spurs that change. What was that? But what we're seeing more today, David, and you've seen it just as much as I have, and we work together trying to grow that, is we're seeing something happen in organizations outside nonprofits. They're getting a better understanding of what it looks like for the talent that people with disabilities have.
Mm-hmm.
And accommodations has always been a kind of a scary thing for most organizations. And now I think we talked about maybe one of your previous conversations is that, the average cost of that accommodation is $300.
Mm-hmm.
So for organizations, there's a better buy-in, a bigger buy-in. But to your point earlier, again, is technology is allowing that. So we're growing through knowledge, we're growing through technology, and we're able to make the things that look different before the usual. And that's good for the entire company. It's good for the person. It's good for society.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're talking about kind of society change as well, right? People are, and as employees, or even the community that organization is trying to serve, um, are kind of demanding that, right? And
Correct.
and society is having some change and push in that. And there's always that other side of the coin. But you'll find that, like in my case, I went back to school and educated myself as an adult, and still struggle to do that, to get a job. I interviewed well, and obviously the hiring manager felt that my qualifications were suitable to do the job. But when I walked into the interview, you can feel the change and difference in the room, and the feel and the vibe of that room, and how hopefully, as we continue to have these conversations, as more and more people with disabilities are advocating for themselves or advocating for a community, that that hiring manager no longer looks at the disability, but looks at the person, what was on the paper and through the conversation, right? The interaction is, I can prove to you that I can do the job through experience or through that interview process.
But David, you had to have the opportunity, and that was exactly right. But there's something you said about self-advocating. The problem is you got to have help to get the things you're looking for. But the problem is that we've found is once we get that help, that the person has to have that desire. And you and I talk about this on a regular basis, is what stops somebody else from continually moving? Is it entitlement, or is it a will or desire? And please understand those two things work hand in hand with each other. And but you and I have had detailed conversations, and I would say that this is one thing that we align on. Without the person's desire, they're going to continue living the life they live.
Oh, absolutely. Right. We were just talking about the other day.
Correct.
What is it that you're willing to accept? Right.
That's a great way to look at it.
And if it's a hardship on you, why should you accept that?
Right.
And with a disability, without a disability, and that self-advocacy comes into play, and I want things to change. And that's what drove me to the show. That's what keeps me going. Talking to hiring managers of the community, or talking with my team members at work. These are my peers, my colleagues that have had a life of acceptance. Well, it's just because it's just the way it has always been, or that's just the way it is, and I'll just sit here and wait.
Well, to your point, look, in about a month, we're going to be at Capitol Hill, and you're going to be advocating for a lot. You're going to be speaking to a lot of different people, and people in the government that can make change. But at the end of the day, it will take that person to help project. We can't demand change. We have to change ourselves. We have to. Now, once we've done that, we can demand more of the people that are answerable to us, that we voted in office. But to your point, I agree wholeheartedly. And I would think that we're seeing a change because more and more people are getting that confidence to do so. And again, it took you the first step to get where you're going, because you will not move unless you make that first step. And just because you're moving does not mean it's progress. You've got to move in a positive direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Whether it's educating yourself, I think a lot of that, though, do you believe comes in risk, right? And I'll say for myself, there's a risk every day of crossing the street.
Correct.
Right. And I can choose to stand on the corner and go, well, there's a chance something bad's going to happen, but I really am thirsty or hungry, and I want to get that cup of coffee, and I have to believe in myself and the training that I had to, my orientation, mobility, etc., those type of skills, and believe strongly enough in myself to cross the street. Otherwise, I can stand there and wait for somebody, or I can turn around and go home. And that comes right, that drive, or as you were mentioning just a minute ago about the desire and what level is that. You are an athlete, as you mentioned, previously, and there was something then in you that drove you, right, to excel in your sport, and which now leads you into your business environment.
Yeah, David, look, the problem I have is each person is individual first, and we all know that, but it's the end goal. What do you want? What are you looking for? And it's kind of a piece for me that I see two sides, and I'll share those two. I want more. Okay. But what am I willing to risk? And what you talked about, just as simple as crossing a street. David, you and I both know one of the problems I've got that we're dealing with, that the great government we have here is the cash cliff. And it's scary for a lot of people. SSDI, it means a lot for people who are disabled because it provides insurance, some training, some additional services. And if you get up to a certain dollar threshold, that's taken away. It's not reduced, it's just taken away. Well, that's very difficult. But at the same step, what I'm trying to say is, if you want this independence, if you want the great American dream, then you're going to have to risk that. because that's what every other person, quote unquote, able body is doing, because that wasn't given to them, excuse me. So there is a risk reward, and how much are you willing to risk? And again, I use you, and I know I embarrass you a lot of times, but you are a great example of what it looks like and what it should be. But for every story of a David Steinmetz, there's somebody else who that fear is crippling to a lot of people, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. And doesn't I'll say that doesn't mean that I don't have those same fears.
That's
right.
Fair. Yes,
and,
sir. Yes, sir.
It's taking an assessment of that and analyzing it and finding a way around that fear and that's who I am. And as you mentioned, people are people, and some have lived a lifetime of fear, lifetime of being taken care of, and there's others that have always said that that's not acceptable, and I'm going to find a way to make it happen. And maybe for the business community is right. How do we help find those people and provide those opportunities for them? And then those that are still struggling, let's help them get through that, whether it's through vocational training, through job training, and allow people the opportunity to fail. I think that's where most people get stumbled, right? Is we're afraid to fail. And if I'm going to fail, then all these things are going to happen.
Well, look, you brought up me being an athlete. Look, I will never hit a ball if I'm in a batter's box if I don't swing. I won't do it. Can't do it. Well, I will never swing if I don't get in the box. I won't get where I'm going unless I'm continuously bettering myself, no matter what we do. So I encourage people to take those risks. But again, I understand. I do. Again, we're going to bring up my daughter briefly. She fell early on when she was walking on a walker, and she was incredibly fearful. And she tenses up. She doesn't want to fall again. And I understand that. But the first thing I did as a parent, knowing that fear can come, I immediately put her back on her walker and said, hey, we got to walk. So again, surroundings have a lot to do with it. And again, a company can encourage that. But you and I both know with the things that we've been fighting for with WIOA and CIE, these are the important things that we'll be fighting for here in a couple of weeks up in DC that will help. And I think that language and the narrative we take will help, because it's continued service, continued examples, and our government understanding the pitfalls where even though we have a job where somebody's gainfully employed, there's still some services that will be needed. And I think there's some who just prosper immediately and some will be slower, but that's true in anything that we do.
Sure.
So I'm a visual learner. So what would happen to me if I lost my sight? Would I take longer to train? Possibly, because I'm a visual learner. So these things are important to understand about the individual. So we talked about the individual earlier. And again, we really need to look at the individual, because if we can't take a person with disabilities and say all disabilities are the same, you and I agree on that. Some are different. But the ones that I struggle with are the ones you can't see with our team. Is everybody's got a disability. It's regardless of who they are. So we've got to learn to work with that disability or with that person and find their talents and continue to push them forward. And I will tell you, most of the times it's being received very well.
Yeah, for sure. We talk about in past shows about culture, right? Or we talk about organizations that are moving forward and being more social or conscious of their employees, and how do they help employees achieve what it is that they want, which also benefits the organization. And it's proven time and time again how organizations actually prosper by having and promoting diversity, and not just the standard general protected groups, but looking at disability, including that in your diversity program. And those opportunities from an organization perspective has to understand at the same time is we're going to invest in that person. And as I mentioned before, right, they may fail, or they may struggle to get the technology right at first or whatever else, but they have to work through that and um, be invested in that process to allow someone to achieve and excel in the organization. And I think for company leaders, that can be scary. That can be, well, if this person's not performing, can I fire them? All these negative thoughts come in, right? And versus just let's work through the process. Let's, make sure that they have the tools like AIB does. AIB is always looking at, when we're looking at a new project, it's not, we can't do it. It's how are we going to do it, and how are we going to do it with someone who is totally blind.
Well, David, you remember early on in my tenure, it was, we had to learn together. I had to learn you, you had to learn me. So there's some give and take. So you're absolutely correct. And, but no different than somebody with disabilities. We're finding how we can work together. And again, we've been doing this 5.5 years, working together. And I've had the great fortune of being the CEO of AIB for 5.5 years. But please understand, it didn't hit the ground running. Not everybody bought into my vision, or I didn't understand their talents. So it took time. So no different with anybody sighted or visual or any type of disability. We have to understand that person. I think you talked about that. So there needs to be some understanding, some training for all parties. But I think as long as we're going to stay on the business aspect of it, an organization that does not know. And that's difficult. It's very difficult. And for us to go, and you and I we have a lot of fun working together when we go see organizations, but it can be intimidating. It can be very intimidating for an organization to hear the two of us talk, because a lot of times they've not had this message presented to them this way. And we're talking about large organizations. And, we've had one in the house recently who has bought in. Now they've done it because of the goodwill of giving. But at the same time, they're a business. They need to be profitable. They have expectations, deadlines, just like everybody else. But they understand, and they had a learning curve. That is exactly what we really need as an organization, as a company, but also society. We need to have an understanding. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Totally fair. And then it goes back to what we're talking about in terms of societal change, right?
Right.
Is attitude, is opening ourselves up to aware of what's happening around us in our community. From a business leader perspective, right? A lot of times it's the bottom line, and they're being pushed by stockholders or whatever it is, right? The stock market and things like that are driving their decision making. And I'm not saying that you should forego, and just to hire someone with a disability, forego and lose money or threaten the business in any way, but opening up our perspective, opening up our minds and our eyes to the talent that's out there, and the contributions that people can bring. There's also, when we talk about society, and you mentioned a couple of times about legislative changes and policy, those things are so hard because we get so many different opinions and so many different other ideas, or someone else telling our story. How do we overcome that? Or I'll say, how do we fight that in terms of getting out the right message? Or
well, you're on to something there, David. And the problem I have is this: there's a politically correct answer and there's a real answer. And you and I both know we're going to, and you also know that I'm probably going to say both. We can work within a group and within a community and our leaders to create a effective message that all can buy into. Okay, that sounds great, right? In reality, we need leadership. We need somebody to take a stance and be prepared for the darts that are thrown at them, and be prepared to understand there'll be highs and lows that go along with it, but that buys in. And again, a leader, and I'm not saying it's red or blue or independent. What I'm saying is a leader. And to me, we're in a political season. It seems like 24/7, 365 now. It doesn't matter if it's election year or not. But as far as me, somebody asked me one time, how do you vote? I said, I walk into a facility, I go in, I close the curtain, and I write down names. And that's what I do. How dare somebody think that I'm going to do that? But what I'm trying to say is this: is that is my thought, that is my prerogative. But at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say, way we're going to make a change is we need good leadership, and we need to buy into that leadership. But for opinions, which everybody has one these days, we need to see what best works. What best works. Let's take a simple as a T account, the old T accounts, and the pros and cons. What more pros do we have than cons? And anything can drive the narrative to get to where we need to be. An informed choice, I think, is incredibly important. But the end of the day is have purpose. So if we put these things together, it will strengthen our narrative and get the job done. But please understand, that's not popular.
Right. Certainly not. I had to take a breath there because, that's what I really hope to get out today, right? Is, we talked about, I've got no computer, no notes. We're just kind of unscripted and going for it.
Well, this is what we do 24/7. People don't realize it.
Exactly. And do you think that leadership, and we're not just talking about on the Hill or in the Oval Office, but right, it could that be at, a Fortune 500? It could be within, our own program.
Yes, sir.
Right. Leadership is at all levels, and when you have your vision and you have some consensus, right, it's much easier to drive that initiative and ideas and concepts to grow on a much larger scale than it is to do it at home or in one spot, because we work all the time, AIB, on bringing the awareness, having conversations at the local level, but we're impacting one person at a time. We have to also expand that and get out to the larger groups.
You've got to be willing to risk some things, as you talked about before. So I'm gonna pick on myself. It's easier done, and that way I don't have to apologize to anybody other than the content. So when I go in and I'm looking at an opportunity, or I have something that I'm buying into that I want to push, I'm very fortunate, of course, just like anybody else. We're a nonprofit. I have board members, and they've given me the autonomy to push a narrative and control our direction. And I'm very fortunate, and I seek advisement. We have meetings, and they've given me a great platform to do so. But I've also got experience from a Source America side, in which is used to be Niche, but Source America, which is for the disabled. And I have it from the commercial side as well. And I'm very fortunate. But at the same time, what's really important is, I think, is that I'm willing to push my narrative. And what does that mean? I am willing to take risk that some are not. And the reason being for it is I make it very personal for me. The way I do so is as a father. And there's not a lot of my colleagues that have children. They may have blindness, they may have a disability, but at the same time, it becomes a little more personal for me because it's my daughter. You always want to do better for your children, always.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if I felt like there was somebody out there that had a voice or had a platform, I would want them to drive that as hard as they possibly can. And that's what motivates me to take some additional risks, more so than others.
Thank you, and apologize for the technical difficulties there. We got our great producer taking care of the situation. But I'll say you're right, and it kind of goes back to that, right? The original top of the conversation is it's personal to you, and that being thrusted into a situation, and maybe your colleagues at other nonprofits or in the private sector is that they've got a child or family member, whatever. And so it becomes personal, and that personal helps drive and motivate you. And then it's your passion, I learned a new term, your riz, your charisma, and it pushes the narrative. And then you are always seeking to get the buy-in. And, we can sit in a room of 10 people and get 10 different opinions. But I think from from a leader's perspective is how do you kind of build that consensus with your colleagues and get buy-in? Maybe not everybody's going to believe it, but you really hope to get them to at least support you.
Well,
right?
you have to, David. You have to have buy-in. If it's me and you talking, and we've got to come to a conclusion, and you see green and I see yellow, we've got to find some common ground. We have to find common ground to get forward motion. We have to.
Mm-hmm.
If not, we're going to continue to talk about our differences. And again, I'm not saying I have the answer to everything, but common sense does prevail that we must find a solution. So what we try to do is find some common ground. And for those ones that we talk about pros and cons, we erase the cons. We come back and talk to them when we have time or when we have additional information to try to push that narrative. But we find that common ground and we push that. It really helps tremendously. That way we leave a conversation with something positive. And I think, unfortunately, we don't do that as a society. We don't do it as an organization at times. I think we do a much better job than most, but we don't always do a great job as a overall entity because we tend to concentrate on the negatives. If we would just learn to concentrate on those positives rather than concentrate on the negatives, we're going to push our narrative much further than we ever have in the past.
Yeah, it's so true. And you and I have had conversations, and it really comes down to just ask a question.
That's
right?
it, man.
And because we don't know what we don't know, which we talk about a lot.
That's a good Southern dialect there, man.
Yeah. And so if we don't ask, then we're just going off our assumptions.
Correct.
And that happens, to me on a daily basis. And it probably a lot harder for people to step up and say, how, if I give you this opportunity, or, I want to give you this opportunity, what is it that you need? Versus saying, well, they can't do it because of whatever reason. And we're making those assumptions. And I find out a lot more about your passion, your vision, and your direction through those conversations when I ask, well, why, or what do you mean by that, or whatever it is, which I say a lot, Chris.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, it's okay. It's the accent.
What are you talking about? But when I'm have better understanding of that, then one, I can support it, or I can say, okay, well, I see where you're coming from, and and it helps me do my job better.
It does. Look, David, at the end of the day, your listeners, excuse me, are not going to understand what this means. But I called you last night when I got back home from our trip, and I made a presentation last night. And I had some issues I told you about. But at the end of the day, I said, David, what do you think? How do we go forward? I need your advisement. So that's us working together. And I took your advisement and I utilized it. Said, Chris, everything okay, but this. Okay, so I took that. I don't internalize it and take it as wrong. I take it as things that make me better to help us drive that narrative, because it's a we, it's not a me. It's never a me. Now, the difference is when I come in, and I do not encourage others to think this way. This is what drives me. It drove me as an athlete, it drove me as a young man, and it drives me today at my age. I think that I can lose my position or my job every single day I walk in the building. I don't encourage people to think that way, but it promotes me in a way that I must produce. And that drives me. So the alarm clock doesn't wake me up. My will to get up. And I think you've heard me say Monday mornings are my favorite day. Love Monday mornings. Full of opportunities, and Fridays get me upset because I didn't finish what I was trying to get done. But that being said, is you've got to have some type of drive that pushes. And I will tell you, regardless if it's a conversation, regardless if it's knowledge, regardless if it's just an experience, I really encourage people to put those together to make it something to push the narrative they're looking for, because it takes that kind of energy to get a positive outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not that when I sit and listen to what you're saying, right? It's not only you've got a plan, you've got that vision of where you want to see the organization go. You get advisement, you have conversations with your colleagues, etc., and you get behind, or you establish a pathway for that. So it's not only you talking about getting fired, right? You're not flying off the seat of your pants. You've got a plan. You got a plan. Yeah. And I think that that's important when we have these conversations in the community, and getting our message out about abilities and not disabilities is having that message is, I've got a plan. This is the ultimate goal. And if you're a business leader or a politician, or a family member that is understanding that this person has abilities, has a drive, or has the right, or the I'll say the right
It's
to
okay.
work and
Right.
to do the things that they want to do. How, as an organization, can I support that as well as grow my business?
So, David, you're on some great topics here. So, allow me just to get a little bit broad here, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
The problem I have personally, and again with AIB, is we're limited because of opportunities that come in our door.
Mm-hmm.
Not persons, but limited to opportunities. So, for growth of an individual and create opportunities, we have to create opportunities for work first.
Mm-hmm.
We're not federally funded, and a lot of people think that we are, and the federal government just throws cash at us. I wish that happened, but it's not a true statement. But at the end of the day, we have to create that opportunity so the work is before the work comes. So we're driving that, and again, in the steps that we take behind the scenes. But that success allows us to create an opportunity to bring people in our organization and become a teammate in whatever that opportunity is.
Mm-hmm.
The problem I have is where we've gotten the perspective of, well, that's not exactly what I want to do. It's tough for me, David. It's very difficult for me, is because I can't create a perfect scenario for a person to work.
Mm-hmm.
I've created an opportunity. I mentioned, we were kind of joking when I was young, I worked in the tobacco field. I don't know that I ever want to go back to that, but I wouldn't mind it if it was a job and I had to pay my rent and I had to put food on the table. That is a job. Now, there's people who have done it all their lives. But for me, if I had my opportunity, I know what I would do. I would do exactly what I'm doing today.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I can't say that for every single person, but we're trying to create opportunities for persons to independence, that purpose in life of work and success. But each person, like an opinion, defines that differently. So I think we're looking at individuals and opportunities and how to marry those two together.
Yeah, I agree. I have similar conversations outside of work, right?
Yes.
Is about very, very similar topics. And sometimes you have to do something, whether it's work or something in life, to know what it is that you don't want to do.
Fair.
Right. And we talked about failure, and sometimes that failure and that setback should push you for change and push you to do something different. And so, yeah, creating an opportunity for an organization this is the line of business that I'm my prime means of business, whether it's a call center or manufacturing or distribution, whatever that organization and product or service that they provide, and they go to seek employees. Maybe not everybody wants to be a material handler.
Correct.
And so they can start off as a material handler and grow with the organization and move up, or they can say, you know what, this isn't for me, but I really like this part of logistics, and I'm going to move into traffic management and booking containers or what, right? There's all kinds of different aspects of distribution, but you had to learn that being a material handler wasn't what I wanted to do. And my career has been that way for quite a bit.
Good. I was going to pick on you, so I'm glad you're bringing it up.
I went to school and I was going to be in business management, procurement, and that's the path I thought was best for me and my family, and my passion, what really gave me pleasure in work, and value, because I think that's part of it. And I know that we'd probably touch on that at some point in this conversation, that work brings to me. And when I couldn't find that pathway and I had an opportunity at AIB to do something, as customer service. Well, I just graduated with a bachelor's degree. I took this customer service role, and hey, leave him alone. Sorry, dog is up and running. That's life, right?
There you go.
And I continue to move in a direction where my passion drove me. And so from doing customer service, entering, managing orders and having that engagement with customers and the floor and so forth, led me to the next opportunity and then the next opportunity. And those weren't given to me. Those are things that I had to compete for internally as well as externally. And some choices didn't work out, and things happened, and it didn't go the way I hoped and expected, or I think the organization did as well. But it was the opportunity to grow myself as well as my peers, as well as the organization. And I think having, an opportunity to where we were in a line of business, that line of business was struggling. I came in, I did my best effort to try and right that line of business, but we weren't set up to do what needed to be done, and that line of business closed. Was that a failure for me? Personally, yes. From an organization or professional well, I see where the challenge is. Those challenges were bigger than me, but I gave it my best effort, and I'm now in a role where I can be successful.
You've touched on several big points there, David, but I promise you, if the listeners don't understand this, you're going to learn much, much more from failure than you ever will success.
Mm-hmm.
I've never understood celebration of an opportunity. I never have. It's the next. As soon as we get an opportunity, we take it and it moves on out of our hands, and we go to what's next. And you've heard me speak of this within our organization. We've had some pretty big wins, and at the same time, I congratulate and then I say, what's next? Now that's my makeup, but I think it's majority of businesses makeup today.
Mm-hmm.
But what's more important is something you talked about for yourself is, you talk about being an individual, and I think it's important to talk about here is you talk how you start out in customer service. Well, great. And a lot of people don't see it as a stepping stone. What people don't understand is today you're talking to congressmen and senators and helping drive a narrative as well as push forward an organization. That's the difference. And I think a lot of persons and people still look at the entitlement mentality that I deserve rather than I need to earn. And if you want that independence, it comes with a price. And we're still trying to educate team members as well as other organizations and other individuals that you just don't start at the top. You're going to work, and there's no time limit on when or how the next step comes.
That's right. Right. Doing the time, right?
Doing the time. That's exactly right.
And that's, I think I agree with you for a lot of people. I went to school, I've invested in myself. I expect this level of pay and I expect this title, but that's just a title. And right, you have to, especially coming out of school or, as a person who is blind, is oftentimes you're starting your first job much later is you have to prove yourself. And not only to the organization, but you have to prove yourself to you that you can do the job and you do have the knowledge and the skills and abilities to do it. And it's a bigger concept, right? Because then it becomes more, I don't know, philosophical or
that's an ugly
right?
word, David.
Yeah, I know, your favorite word.
I hate that one.
But it comes down to is can I really do the job?
Right.
And people, and I think you mentioned, right, is failure's easy, and it makes it so, well, it wasn't my fault, or it was this or was that, and it gives you an excuse not to move forward.
Look, David, planning is 100%, and planning and really, if you plan for success and you do all the steps necessary strategically to be successful and you still fail, have you failed? Or have you learned? Is it an exercise? Now, people look at it differently. Remember, I'm a half full guy, glass half full, but I see it as preparation for your next opportunity. And that's preparing me to be successful. Unfortunately, remember, vision looks different to a lot of different people. And that word philosophical, it's always up to debate to me. But again, success can be personal, can be individual, it can be organizational. But I will find it becomes like a fire with success. It breeds additional success.
Sure.
But so does failure. And as soon as you say, I can't, you won't. And that's something we talk about at AIB often. We'll go into meetings and we'll talk positively. We'll talk about the negatives, but we'll talk about the positives as well. We try to end on positives. But please understand that I am not saying that negatives and failure doesn't happen. It happens a lot more than success. But if you never try, you will never be successful.
Sure. And it goes right back to, right, if I stand on that corner and I turn around and walk away,
you're going to be hungry.
Exactly. And if I say, well, I've never adventured out and tried, then I wouldn't have done it. So did I really fail if I turned around? Yeah, I'm hungry, but I took the initiative and said, I'm getting out of my house and I'm going to go get something to eat. And I got halfway. Maybe tomorrow I'm going to go and I'll get all the way across the street.
It's a great way to look at it.
And, like you said, success builds on success. And how you look at, was it a failure? We can always turn those failures around and turn it into a positive. Any setback is, okay, yeah, this happened, but I got so far or whatever it is, and I can make a change and do things differently. And we talk about that into a business environment and say, well, I hired somebody with a disability and they did 85, 90% of the job, and they were successful. And well, let me hire another person and they do 100%. Okay, now I'm doing better, right? And or I got somebody and they weren't job ready. And that person, I had to let that person go. You still succeeded in your initiatives of hiring people with disabilities or hiring out of a different community, marginalized community. And just because one didn't work out doesn't mean that they're all not going to work out.
You're absolutely correct. And for an organization that has never participated or ever worked with someone who has disabilities or vision issues, it's a daunting task. What am I getting myself into? How am I going to prepare? Do we have to manage it? What do we have to do? There's so many questions. But what happens if that person doesn't work out the first or second time? I mean, that's a realization that some organizations have to take. But I will promise you, just like anybody else, that they don't have 100% hire of quote unquote able bodies either. We know that. Yes. Yep, so right. We need to understand that. If we put expectations like that on the blindness community and or disabled disability community, we're going to have, we're setting ourselves for failure again. But go back, David, at the end of the day, it's conversations like this that open up, I think, new ways of thinking, new opportunities, new thoughts, new ideas. But again, the one thing that's difficult is to change a stronghold of opinion. And I like to think that we are doing a better job of changing that narrative. And again, at one conversation at a time, but also through actions, through discussions that may be offline. And to me, these are discussions that are needed. I don't need somebody else with a suit on in DC telling me what they think is best, especially when they've never been to our organization. And that's a concern. That's a real concern. So I think the voices of our community need to speak up more. They need to contact their representatives, but they also shouldn't be afraid to self-advocate. So what we talked about earlier, in order to see the change that we're looking for, it will take all. It will not take some.
Yeah, very true. And I find that my biggest impact, AIB's biggest impact, comes from the interaction, right? I can talk to you over the phone again, like, I can send you an email, and I can tell you through that communication all the things that people who are blind can do, all the things that I can do, and how I can help move your organization forward, or what AIB can do for your business. Until we sit down face to face and have the conversation, how many times has someone walked into our organization not having any understanding of why they're there? What is it that you can do for me as an organization, right, to my business, and then walk out going, I had no idea.
No clue.
And I can see the possibilities. And so one conversation at a time is extremely important. And we're reaching a much bigger audience than, you and I just sitting here today, which is fantastic. But until you have that opportunity to see me walking down the street, going to get my cup of coffee, and hey, how you doing today? And, tell me about your dog or whatever it is. And if I'm open to that, then I'll have the conversation. If I'm like, you know what, I'm in a hurry, I got to get my cup of coffee, I don't want to tear your head off. I'm catch me later. And, but we have to have the interaction. We have to have the opportunity. And if you're trying to figure that out, there's nonprofit organizations, and rephrase that. There's social enterprise nonprofit organizations throughout the U.S. that are believing in people and believing in their abilities and running successful organizations and providing value products and services to private as well as government agencies. And they're successful. And so look at that as a model for private sector.
So I'm going to bring AIB into this. Is about 2 years ago, we brought in, and I think you brought up a good point. And that's what I want to kind of elaborate on it. About 2 years ago, we brought in a company, and we were fortunate because they took a leap of faith.
Mm-hmm.
They were in our distribution, and they are in our distribution arena, and they were not being serviced properly. This company took a leap of faith and said, okay, AIB, you got a shot. This is a commercial opportunity. This is non-government. It took a lot for them to do so. It is not a real large company, but small enough to make a difference and somewhat flexible. They're a subsidiary of a very large organization. Mm-hmm. So they did so. And first couple of months was some challenges, some speed bumps, which is any type of opportunity and transition. You will always have that. But once the smoke started to clear, there was some efficiencies created and some things started happening. And this organization today has increased sales 38% because of the relationship with AIB, because we've been able to create and direct certain areas of their business in which they were failing and would eventually cause them to go out of business. That's showing you the talent. Okay. Mm-hmm. I don't see that on the nightly news. That's not going to be anywhere. But you talked about early on the P&L. Please that for anybody else that don't know what that is, that's profit and loss statement. When you run a company, it's very important. But that right there shows you the impact of what talent can provide. And that talent happened to be visually impaired or blind. Now, when they came in the door, they saw blindness.
Mm-hmm.
Today, they see a partner. Mm-hmm. Now, we took those steps to prove, and we're fortunate we did not fail. And one of the things I pridefully told them, we will not fail. Mm-hmm. There's no guarantee there.
Right.
But that's the pride I have in AIB and the AIB way. But we were able to prove ourselves, but we had to have the opportunity, David, through a conversation. A conversation led to the opportunity. And today that is a successful relationship that will continue to grow. And it's really exciting because they can't wait to see what's next.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And right, success builds on success.
That's correct.
And I think it's really important in our conversations on a daily basis is understanding that when given the opportunity, given the right training and the right technology, and most importantly, the right attitude, because we talked about that, right, from our team members, right attitude, that desire to be successful, as well as the attitude of that partner to believe in the fact that this is your business model. You know what you're doing. You've got a talented workforce. I'm going to move my business here, and now I get to reap those benefits. And I'm guessing that it wasn't strictly their increase in revenue and sales is strictly because they hired a bunch more sales people and generating. It's from the level of service that their customers are receiving. And those are things that can't really be measured. I think a lot of times you can say it's increased profits, increased revenue, but that comes from things that are unmeasurable, and that's the talent and the level of service that you provide to your customer.
It is, David. But again, this all started by someone taking a chance and seeing what the talents and opportunity and capabilities of AIB was. And more organizations are going to do that. We have another one in-house that's doing it today. We've started a small pilot program. You're very familiar with it, and it will grow. And we had the CEO of that company in about a week ago. And that person said, this will be a success. Sounds familiar. So, and this is a very big opportunity for AIB, but it's a big opportunity for that company as well. But at the end of the day, for our team, it's a bigger opportunity because it will help, again, showcase their talents, their capabilities, and help create some upward mobility.
Yeah. Thank you. And we're just about out of time in this conversation. And I know that this conversation will continue tomorrow and the day after, and the day after, and the day after. And it's important that these conversations are had. It's important that we listen to each other and we and show respect. And that's really what I think I'm looking for as a person who is blind, is to come in as be respected, and then for the talents that I bring, respected for my contributions. And that's what I want to give to the person sitting on the other side of the table. And those conversations are so important. And so if we want to continue to have these conversations, feel free to reach out to me through LinkedIn or social media accounts at AIB. And Chris, if someone wants to get in contact with you, what's the best way?
CLAF as in Frank, OLLETTE at AZIFB.com.
Fantastic. Thank you. And again, thank you as a leader of AIB and believing in this show and continuing to sponsor it, and thanking AIB and all our team members to be able to share their success and their stories.
Thank you, David. And thank you for this platform as well, sir.
Thank you for listening to Changing the Perception of Blindness, one conversation at a time, with your host, David Steinmetz. Be sure to subscribe to Changing the Perception of Blindness, one conversation at a time, on your favorite podcast platform. And tune in live on Phoenix Business Radio X every third Friday at 9 a.m. We hope you feel inspired by today's conversation, and maybe we've even sparked a new idea or opportunity.